All right, here's year 2017, problem number 4. It has comparing box plots. It also has it just asked you to compare. It didn't ask you to actually describe the distribution or compare the distributions. Comparing the distributions would have compared shape, outlier, center, spread, and compared the socks. Now, I will tell you from the get-go that I actually did this. I always do them without looking at the answer keys. I would have gotten 3.5 points on this, so I would have gotten a 3 at the end instead of a 4. And I'll explain to you where I went wrong with that. So here we go. You have these 3 different sites, and at each site is that held pottery. And at these 3 sites, there were 3 different chemicals, X, Y, and Z. And so they were trying to look at a particular chemical in the pottery and then perhaps identify the site that it came from. So here we go. For chemical Z, describe how the percents found in the pieces of pottery are similar and how they are different. So remember, when we would describe the distribution, we would be talking about shapes, outlier, center, and spread. So those are the ideas that you want to talk about comparing when we're discussing this. So in fact, if we look at the grading guidelines, to get an essentially correct on this, they wanted you to recognize and describe the comparison of the centers and the spread of shape, outlier, center, and spread. Usually, the 2 most important ones are that center and spread. So you had to recognize that the medians or the centers are almost the same for all 3 sites of chemical Z. You had to recognize that the variability, so either ranges, interquartile ranges, or some indication of spread, is different across all 3 sites. Okay. And then, of course, you're discussing the site's chemical Z. And so you're discussing this in context of this problem. All right, so here is how that might sound. I had said chemical Z has the same median percent of chemicals, see, context, same median, same center, in pottery, regardless of the site in which the pottery was found. Then I did go, I think, into there. Did I discuss exactly what that median was? So I probably should have done that and said, so that median is right at about 7, it's approximately 7, whatever the measurement, units of measurement for this chemical. Okay. And then I said the variability for chemical Zs are quite varied among the 3 sites. And then I went into specific. Remember, when we use comparison, you need to use comparative language. More varied, less varied, is more than, less than, more skewed, more, if you were doing shape, that kind of thing. So make sure you use comparative language. So site 3 was the most varied in the percents, and then I gave an actual number. Even though site 1 has the same IQR as site 3 of 4, it is less varied range of 6. So I'm going into a lot more details. Because you never know exactly how much they're going to want to see in details. Site 2 is definitely the least varied in its percents of chemical Z, with a range of only 2% and an IQR of 1%. Okay, so there you go. So I compared all 3 of them and I gave information on that. This part B is the one where I would have missed full credit. I would not have gotten an E. I would have gotten partial credit. So let's talk about what happened on that one. So this is where they had gotten some pottery from a particular site. They did not know which site it came from, but the sum of the 3 chemicals was 20.5. And so based on that sum and the box plots here, identify which site it came from. So the best answer would be to put the bounds on the sums of the chemicals, the lower bound minimum and the upper bound maximum of the sums of those chemicals. For example, we would be adding together in site 1, 6 plus 11 plus 4. And those are the three minimums. So that would tell me that the lowest sum you could have was 21 at site 1. So FYI, at that point, I already know it couldn't be this 20.5. Okay, so you could do that. They would accept that if you just did that minimum and said, therefore, that sum of 20.5 could not come from site 1. Okay, the maximum, by the way, is 33. So, of course, now site 2, if you did the minimums, they added up. So I did these, like 1.8, and that was 6, and then I think I did that one as 3. So the minimum was 12.8, which doesn't exclude the 20.5, but if you summed the maximum of those ones, the maximums of site 2 with being 7 plus 8 plus 4, that maximum of site 2 is 19, which excludes that 20.5. So the sum of 20.5 could not come from site 2. However, with site 3, the mins summed to 13.5, the maxes summed to 26.5, the only one that included that sum of 20.5. Therefore, the pottery had to come from site 3. Now, here's where I would have lost credit. If you didn't choose site 3, you automatically got an I. I chose site 3, but I did not have the correct justification as to why it was site 3. So take a look here. So I chose site 3 to get full credit, and then you showed the minimum and the maximum of them, and then you explained why that sum of 20.3 had to be only and uniquely from site 3. Okay, partial correct if you excluded one of those three components. So see, I did not get this sum of those minimums and maximums because what I did the first time was I added up the medians. And so what happens is if you approximated the sum with the medians, then 27.5 was the sum of the medians at site 1, 16 was the sum of the medians at site 2, and 20 was the sum of the medians at site 3. And I said, therefore, it's got to come from site 3 because that's the closest median. So if you did that, then it says here, if you compared the sums by indicating that the sum of the medians were closest to 20.5, then you get a P, but not, you can, because what that does is that says you do not get credit for component 2, but you can get credit for component 3. All right, so there is how you got full credit on that particular part. Now, the third question says, suppose you could only analyze one particular chemical, X, Y, or Z. Which one should you analyze to distinguish which site that pottery came from? So, chemical Y would have been the best chemical to identify. And the reason you had to state something to this effect. The chemical Y was distinct, unique, different at each one of the three sites. So I went into details about it because I'm always wanting to provide more details to make sure I've covered my bases. But there was no overlap in the amounts of chemicals. So those kinds of words would get you credit. Distinct, unique, no overlap, different for every single site, that kind of thing. So some people, like you could have gotten a P if you said something such as this. I would look to see which chemical is distinct at all three sites or unique at all three sites or doesn't overlap. But you didn't actually come right out and say chemical Y. You got a partial credit because you had the right idea, but you actually didn't answer the question, which was, which chemical would you analyze? So you would choose chemical Y and that correct justification based on the fact that it was distinctive across all three sites. All right. So the way that, see, you could say that they don't overlap. You could talk about the variability and the ranges and all of those kinds of things. Okay. If you just said too generically, the box plots vary, or chemical Y varies the most, or if you said any of those kinds of things, then you automatically get sent to a P. All right. Now, let's talk about how those credits work as far as how would you get 1, 2, 3, and 4 points. It would be the same as how you got those on that 28 question number 5. Anytime there's 3 components we check for, then here's the way you got scored. You would get a 4 if you got EEE. You would get a 3 if you got EEP or EPP. You would get a 2 if you got 2 E's and an I, EP and I, or PPP. So a 2 or 1.5 essentially. And then you would get a 1 if you got an E or a PP. All right, so there you go. And so that is how you do your scoring for problem number 4 on test the year 2017.